I don't make this stuff out of thin air. I make it out of thick air. But this is rabbinic tradition, some academic tradition mixed in. But most of what I'm sharing with you has been around for a very, very long time, just underground. It's not the stuff we hear in synagogue or church or anywhere else you study Bible on a Wednesday night or something. That's especially true for the story that we're going to deal with today, the story of Adam and Eve. So that's our topic. But it was pointed out that last week I neglected to explain this word pardes. We went through the 4 levels of reading of the Bible, and I was going to review those anyway, but I didn't tell you what the acronym actually stood for. So I will rectify that. So there are 4 levels of reading the Bible in the rabbinic tradition. Peshat, if you remember, or if you weren't here, this will bring you up to date. Peshat means simple. It's the literal reading. You can't change the words in the text and pretend the original isn't there. You can play with the words of the text in so many radical ways to make you think the original word wasn't there, but you can't just take it out. So you start with the pshat, you start with the simple or the literal. In some religious circles, that's as far as you go. Right? You just read the literal, and that's the end of it. You just say, well, that's what it says, and you don't ask more deeply, what does it mean? But in a Jewish context, that's just the starting place. And when you're learning this as a little kid, by the time you're 8 or so, just when your skepticism starts to click in anyway, as you move into the tween years especially, you go, oh, come on, this can't be right. Well, from the Jewish point of view is, okay, now you're ready. It isn't right. Right? The literal is just the place you start. Then I don't want to say you outgrow it, but you grow into it so much more deeply that it's no longer the literal. And the first way you do that is with the second level of reading called remez. Remez means the rabbi is here. That's not what remez means, but the rabbi is here. The Rabbi Mark, good morning. Chag Sameach. Nice of you. You want to sit down? Yeah, we're going to have you blow the shofar. No. Where? In the parking lot? Right there. Well, nice to see you. Happy holidays. So remez is the second level of reading. Remez means hint. And the idea is when you take a look at the literal, you discover there's weird stuff there that doesn't make sense. And rather than gloss over it, the rabbinic approach is that you understand these hints, these seeming errors in the text or incredible notions in the text, you see them as hints for deeper exploration. There's something more here, the Bible is saying. Drash means to investigate the something more. Now, remez and pshat are limited to the text in front of your face. You look at the Bible and it says, as we will see shortly, that Eve is never exiled from the garden. Now, I know you don't go, what? That can't be right. I've seen the stained glass window. I've seen the movie. Right? And all the stained glass windows, Adam and Eve are like, oh, we're so ashamed. We ate the fruit. But that's not what the Bible says. It's just what we've been told the Bible says, and we don't question it. So, Peshat and Remez, you have to deal with what it says. And it says she's not kicked out of the Bible, of the garden. Then you go to drash and go, well, what does that mean? What is going on? Where Peshat and Remez have to use the printed text, drash is your imagination. That's where drash happens. It's in your imagination. The product of drash is a verb, investigate. The product of drash is midrash. You just put an M-I in front of drash. And that's a noun. It's the investigations, the things you came up with. And in a traditional Jewish setting, you don't do this alone. You always have at least one partner with whom to push back and forth on these investigations, to go deeper and deeper and deeper, to see what else you can find, because there's no limit to the possible meanings of that are hinted at in the text. Sometimes you go beyond your imagination and you get some kind of intuitive insight that knocks your socks off. And that's called sod, mystery or secret. It's hard to describe sod, and the only products of sod we have become midrash. So you don't even see them as these intuitive leaps. But if you can imagine a difference between your imagination and some higher functioning intuition, that's the shift from drash to sod. Drash, imagination, is still limited to what you know. You're playing with ideas you've got in your head, and you're coming up with new meanings in the biblical text. But sod, at least this is the idea, is a flash of insight that is a surprise even to you. It doesn't feel like you made it up or you constructed it. It's like revelation. It just comes. And it makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, because it's just, wow, what is that? And where did that come from? So where it comes from, in the rabbinic idea, is this is a divine revelation. It's coming from that level of human consciousness that is in touch with the divine mind. And you just channel this new insight. So, not that you need to remember any of these words, but that level of consciousness is called mochin, M-O-C-H-I-N, which means mind, D apostrophe, gadlut, G-A-D-L-U-T. Mochin de gadlut, it means spacious mind. It's what, in a Christian context, you might call the mind of Christ. Or, if you were Buddhist, it's Buddha mind. But it's that level of consciousness that puts you in direct contact with the divine. And something new comes in that isn't from your egoic self or even your egoic imagination. Peshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. If you take the first letters of each word, you end up with this Hebrew word pardes, so P-R-D-S, and then you have to put vowels in just so you can pronounce it, and the vowels you put in when you speak it are the A and the E, pardes. Pardes means paradise, or orchard, or garden, but it's symbolic in Judaism of paradise, of heaven. When all four of these dimensions of interpretation are operating, when you have all four cylinders firing, you leave your normal everyday mind and you're lifted into this paradise. So, and this is not part of the class, we're going to go to the text in a moment, but this is key to understanding the nature of Judaism. That when in Hinduism and in Buddhism, in monastic Christianity, you enter into these higher levels of consciousness primarily through different kinds of meditation and contemplation, where you're letting drop all the ideas and texts and teachings. But in Judaism, you work with the texts and teachings. Judaism is a literary religion, and it's all about words. It's all about language. And so, while you see this is wrong, this is not factual, But the ideal in Judaism is you can't have an illiterate Jew. Now, obviously you can, right? I'm not pointing out anybody in particular, but you can. And that's sad. And if there's anything that threatens the future of Judaism, it isn't intermarriage and liberal interpretations of the tradition, it's illiteracy. Because if you can't do what we're about to do, it's very hard to be, in my estimation, a serious Jew. Now, most of you aren't Jewish. We're going to set up a table for the guys in the back who would like to become Jewish. But I think we'll wait a couple weeks before we do that, so you trust me more. All right, so this is what I left out last week, that in Jewish circles, this is a spiritual practice. This is not an academic practice. And that's why, even though in Hebrew, we often speak of the term, or we often use the term limud, L-I-M-M-U-D, which does mean study, the deeper understanding of study is from this other word, shuv, if you can read the difference between my U and my V, S-H-U-V, which means to turn. So you don't study the Torah as if it were a fixed thing. You turn it, and meaning you play with it. You're constantly, well, let's look at it from this angle and this angle, let's turn it upside down, and you can do so many things with the text. But as you do that, as you turn the text turns you from the lower level of consciousness to the higher level of consciousness. Now, that requires a lot of Hebrew knowledge, but today requires none. So last week we did have some Hebrew stuff we had to learn. This is the only Hebrew that we're going to learn, and it has nothing to do with the class. So this one is all directly in front of you in your English translations, unless you're dealing with the Message Bible. I know someone brought that last week. But unless you're dealing with the Message Bible, where he's telling the story but not actually translating the text, what we're going to be exploring is right there in English. But for some reason, we haven't noticed it in over 2,000 years. And that just goes to the power of propaganda. It goes to the power of our clergy, of whatever stripe, to tell us stuff, and we go, oh, that must be true. Because they told us. As opposed to looking at the text ourselves. I mean, that's the scary thing when he did it about Martin Luther. When he said, no, we should read this ourselves. Let's make a German translation and make it available to everybody. Well, the church did not like that idea. When the Bible, we mentioned this last week, when the Bible was being translated into English, the church did not like that idea either. Because it's dangerous to let the people read the Bible for themselves. They might not agree with the official interpretation. In Judaism, you're supposed to read it for yourself. And today, we're going to read this for ourselves. So we're going to turn to chapter 3 of Genesis. So it starts with the serpent. So the man and the woman, actually, I lied to you. I said you don't need any other Hebrew. But it's too good not to see this. So you can tell I love what I do. So we talked a little bit last time. The word that most Bibles translate as man is Adam. Imagine when you pronounce it that there's an H in there, right? Adam, it's not Adam, right? Adam is a boy's name. Adam is the Hebrew for human. And it comes from the word Adamah, which means earth. The best translation of Genesis I've ever read is Karen Armstrong's book. I think it's just called Genesis. And she translates she translates Adam not as human, because people don't get the human-humus connection. You hear that? The human-humus, not human hummus. Hummus is chickpea paste. That's a different thing. But the human-humus, she translates it as earthling from the earth. And it's just that it really gets what they're talking about. In our story, we're already beyond the generic earthling. And we know that, the Bible's not consistent. So in the earlier story that's printed, it's a later story as far as when it was written. But the first story has God create the Adam, male and female. In the second creation of people, God creates a man and then later creates a woman. But the first creation, in the second story, the man that God creates is not called a man, he's called Adam. All right, so now we know that means human. Then it says that, and from the human from Adam, we get two other words. One is the word ish, I-S-H, I'm just making up the spelling. The other is isha. So ish means man, not human, but actually a man, a male. Isha means woman. And the rabbi said that these don't come from the word Adam, they come from the word esh. So this is going to be a little complicated, but you can handle it and it'll make sense out of the story. Esh, E-S-H, means fire. Esh is the Hebrew word for fire. Ish is a derivation of esh. And the way it would look if I actually wrote this out in Hebrew, or the way it looks in the text, is you have an aleph, a shin, and then in the middle, you have a yud. The yud is the first letter of God's name, the YHVH name. So, and this is man, literally, a male. So the rabbi said, the words come from esh, fire. The human, the male human, is a holy fire. All right, so we have this, however you want to understand that. They don't define it. You're men talking to you. You're a holy fire. You have all of this energy. Woman, you have the letter aleph, the same letter shin, and then you have a hey at the end, and the yud is not there, even though this is pronounced ish, man, and this is called isha, woman. Just by the nature of Hebrew grammar, the holy letter yud or y is not overtly present in the female. Now, if you're like good patriarchal misogynist men, you say to yourself, aha, I knew it. I'm a holy fire and she's just a smoldering fire, right? But that's not what they understood. What they understood was that the letter E, the letter Yud here, the Y, the holy letter of God's name, is completely internalized in a woman. Here, for the man, it's just part of his makeup. But for the woman, it's completely internalized. She has, and I'm using this word on purpose, digested her own holiness. It's not a potential. It's not just one element. She's not just a holy fire. She's an esh, a fire that is completely permeated, so completely permeated by divine wisdom, and I'm just setting you up for the story, by divine wisdom that you don't have to put the letter in the middle. Instead, you get the H, because the letter here, hey, is the letter H, which is the second letter of God's name. And when you put the first two letters together, you get YH, or Yud Hey, which is pronounced Yah, which is a complete name of God. When you sing or say hallelujah, hallelujah means praise, and you're praising Yah, right? That's what it means. So what happened with Isha? Isha has so totally, woman, has so totally internalized the divine wisdom that it now doesn't come out, it's not expressed the way it is in a man, just as a potential. It's expressed as a direction, because the letter Hey at the end of a word is often a sign of direction. A man is a holy fire. A woman is a holy fire who knows where she's going. All right, so this will make sense as you get into the story. Okay, so chapter 3. We'll just deal with the English for the most part. Now, I've got in my Orthodox translation, Jewish Orthodox translation, now the serpent was cunning beyond any beast of the field. What have you got besides cunning? More crafty, more subtle, more shrewd, more intelligent? Wow, what translation is that? Which one? Common English. That is the best English translation. It said, her Bible, Common English Bible says, the most intelligent. Not shrewd, not cunning, not crafty, because those are negative. The serpent is the most intelligent being in creation. The actual Hebrew is naked. The serpent it's A-R-U-M, arum. It's the exact same word that's used when Adam and the woman, or the man and the woman are created. It says they were naked and not ashamed. Right? Because they hadn't eaten anything yet. Shame always comes from eating, at least in my case. Because, I never have an apple, I have the entire pie. So then I go, oh, I can't believe I ate the whole thing, and I'm ashamed. But the word that they use, the word that the Bible, that the Torah uses, is simply arum, naked, but plural. Arumim, put an I-M at the end, it's plural. The serpent, the Bible says, is the most naked of all the creatures in the garden. So what does that mean, naked? I mean, you might imagine, because some of these stories are what's called teleological. They try to explain nature as we see it, and there's a part of that in the punishment section of our story. But it may mean that because the serpent sheds its skin and no one else can do that, maybe that's why they called it the most naked. But that doesn't really make sense, since Adam and Eve are also called naked and they don't shed anything. So, well, that's not true, because I've been watching TV a lot lately, and every other commercial is for eczema, cream. So maybe we do shed, I don't know. But and remember, there's hundreds and thousands of commentaries. One of the commentaries says that the serpent is the most naked, and naked means pure, unsullied by any kind of sin or the potential for sin. Now, we want to say the serpent is the bad guy in the story. But this commentary says, no, the serpent is actually the most intelligent, the most pure of all God's creations. So then they go, okay, so wait, that's, we don't have it up here anymore, but that was the notion of Peshat, the simple reading. It says naked, and not cunning, and not all the rest of it. So there's a hint there that something else is going on. What's the hint? You don't know. You have to investigate. So one of the ways they investigated this was through numerology, and they discovered that the word for serpent has the numerical value, because every Hebrew letter has a value assigned to it, because Hebrew doesn't have numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so every letter does double duty as a numeral. if you take the letters of the word snake, it adds up to 356. Then, according to the rabbis, any other words with the same value, in this case 356, can be used as synonyms if doing so allows you to come up with a new reading of the Bible that is meaningful. And one of the words that comes up with the number 356 is Messiah. Messiah. So the snake is the most intelligent, pure, naked being because the snake is, in fact, the Messiah who takes on the form of a snake in order to converse with the humans. Though he doesn't talk to the humans, he only talks to one human. Only talks to the woman. She doesn't have a name yet. She's just Isha, this internalized holy fire with a direction. The serpent only talks to her. Now, in conventional translations, conventional commentaries, Jewish, Christian, it's because women, not the woman in the story, but women are easily seduced by snakes. Which you see on TV all the time. But women are easily seduced. And if they're easily seduced, they're not that intelligent. And if they're not that intelligent, they really shouldn't have leadership positions. And they shouldn't be trusted as witnesses in a courtroom. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. And they certainly shouldn't have power over men. And they shouldn't teach men in the church or anywhere else. And they shouldn't be rabbis, which is still what orthodoxy and that end of the Jewish spectrum says. Because there's something profoundly wrong about women, which is what the snake knew, and that's why the snake took advantage of the couple by speaking to the weak link of the two of them, which was this woman. That's what you normally hear. This is the most insidious story in the entire corpus of Western literature. It is the foundational story of all women hatred. And it's wrong. It's wrong. Why would the serpent, who now let's say is this divine character and Messiah character, why would the serpent speak to, there's just a man and a woman here, but why would the serpent speak to the woman rather than the man? Because it's the woman who's already internalized, at least potentially, the whole notion of divinity. She has innately has a higher level of consciousness than the man. She has a higher level of consciousness than the man. So if you're going to talk to one or the other of them, you ought to talk to her. With me so far? I mean, this is not, the women are going, yeah. The guys are going, what is he talking about? So the serpent and the woman have this conversation, and the serpent says, you should eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It doesn't say apple, right? It doesn't tell you what kind of fruit it is. In Jewish commentary, they think it's a pomegranate. But somehow it becomes an apple, and the apple with a bite out of it is the symbol of Apple computer. So it's really part of our culture in the West. But the serpent tries to talk her into doing it. And she says, we're going to die if we do it. We're not supposed to even touch it. Now, God didn't tell the man, don't touch it. God just told the man, don't eat it. And so the commentary said, when the man spoke to the woman, he said, don't eat it. In fact, don't even touch it. Right? So the serpent says, nah, you're wrong. If you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you'll be like God in the sense that you'll understand good and evil. So normally we think in terms of morality. Good, we're thinking good is what's morally good, and evil is what's morally evil. But we don't have any concept of good and evil in the Bible yet. When God looks at creation, which God does over and over and over again, and says it's good, it's not using the word good in a moral frame. It's using the word good as in correct. It works physiologically. You know, the oceans are good in the sense that they do what oceans are supposed to do. The trees and all the things that grow in the earth, they're good because they're doing what they're supposed to do. It's not like a tree can be immoral. So the good that we're talking about is an immoral good. God looks at creation and says, yeah, this is functioning the way it's supposed to work. God looks at people and says, very good. This is really the way things are supposed to go. So the knowledge that one gets by eating from the tree of knowledge isn't a moral knowledge, though it may include that. It's a knowledge of the interdependence, interconnectedness of all opposites. The tree of knowledge of good and evil could be read as the tree of knowledge of yin and yang, the tree of knowledge of all opposites, which are all connected together. If you eat from this tree, the serpent is saying to her, you don't die. You actually wake up to the way the world works, how everything goes together. And while things seem like they're opposites, they're all interconnected. She has no idea what he's talking about. She doesn't respond. But the idea must be percolating in her head. So here comes the scary part. Chapter 3, verse 5. And the woman, so this Isha, and the woman perceived that the tree was good for eating. In other words, that it would taste good. And that it was a delight to the eyes. It just looked beautiful. What a great thing to just have and hold it. And that it was desirable as a means to wisdom. And she took the fruit and she ate it. That's the Peshat. That's the simple reading. She saw that it was delicious. She saw that it was beautiful. She saw that it would make her wise. So she ate it. The hint, the remez, is why tell us any of that? The whole point is she ate it. Why doesn't it just say, and the woman took from the tree, took of its fruit, and ate? The other stuff is superfluous. It doesn't matter if it looked delicious or beautiful or that she knew it would make her wise. All that matters is she ate it. The Torah, the Bible, especially the Hebrew Bible, is ancient literature written very succinctly. It doesn't put in a lot of extras. When you get to the New Testament, you have a much more sophisticated literary class. They're telling us stories in much more detail. But in the early biblical stories, it's pretty sparse. So why put in these three clauses? She saw that it was good to eat. She saw that it was beautiful. She saw that it would make her wise. Now, that's the remez, that's the hint. One of the, and you can't, I mean, we could try to guess, but there's no point in my having you guess. One of the commentaries that I find so powerful regarding this story is that these three clauses represent three different encounters with the tree. The Bible shrinks them down into one verse, but it's actually three different encounters with the tree, representing three different acts of maturation on the part of the woman. So her first encounter, after meeting the snake, who implants in her head, this is a good idea, you ought to eat it. She's wandering around the garden, and she comes by the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the tree of knowledge of all the opposites, or the integration of all opposites. And she sees the fruit, and she knows it must taste delicious. If you go to Whole Foods or Publix or Kroger's, and they wax, I don't know about Whole Foods, but they wax the fruit lots of times to make it glow, because they know you're going to go, oh, that apple looks so good. They're trying to entice you to buy it and then eat it, right? Here, everything is free. So it just looks good. She knows intrinsically, oh man, this would taste so good. But she doesn't eat it because it looks delicious. The commentators say she is now encountering her innate hungers. That this first clause is about her mastering the generic human hunger for consumption. Right? Because the human is esh in our heart. Fire consumes. So she sees that, this would be so good to just eat it, but she doesn't eat it. So the commentators say she's mastered her hunger. Right? You with me? So you got that? And she walks away. The second clause is another visit to the tree. We don't know if it's deliberate or she's just wandering around, but she's wandering around, she sees the tree again, and she looks at the fruit and she goes, man, it is so beautiful. I would just love to possess it. I don't need to eat it, but this would look great. Sitting on the hearth over the fireplace, if I could just get that guy to build me a house, with a fireplace. But I just want to own it. I'll just carry it around. Because it's so beautiful. Look how beautiful this is. But she doesn't take it or eat it. So the commentators say she is now mastering a second layer of human desire, the desire to possess, to own. So first she masters our desire to consume, then she masters our desire to hoard, to own, to collect. So if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but Erich Fromm was a very famous commentator, Freudian psychoanalyst, philosopher, sociologist, died in the 60s maybe. And Erich Fromm has one of his great books, he's got a lot of excellent books, but maybe one of his most important is called To Have or To Be. And he says those are the two fundamental human choices. We can either live our lives driven by the desire to have things, or we can live our lives simply celebrating the fact that we are, that we exist, that we be. He says being is higher than having. So here is the woman mastering the human desire for having. I mean, most of us haven't gotten there yet. If we did, 99% of the commercials on television wouldn't be running. Right? They show me that, no offense if the Lexus dealer is in the room, but what I consider an ugly, ugly car with that big grill. I don't know what's the point of that thing. And they're trying to get me, oh, you want this, or the Jaguar. Right? You have to pronounce it Jaguar because you're not an ignoramus. So, I mean, they're driving, and when they're driving, they're always the only person in the country that's on the road. I used to have a Porsche, right? Not a Porsche, a Porsche, right? I ghost wrote a book for a company, and the payment was a 944S Porsche. You have to put the S in because the 944 is please. Who's gonna? So I had this Porsche red 944S, amazing car in Miami, Florida, where the speed limit is, I don't know what it is, let's say 65, but the actual limit you can go given the traffic on any highway is around 12. But in the commercials, you're always the only person and you're zipping around. And it's not even just men now behind the wheel, it's men and women. Everyone's alone in the car because really driving with your kids is annoying. So you're driving alone in the car and there's just open road. And you're in this zone. That's because we haven't mastered the second level functioning of having. But the woman does. So she sees it, it's delicious to eat, but she walks away. She masters that level of hunger. She comes back another time, she sees it, it's beautiful, she'd like to possess it. It's not like she doesn't have the drive or the desire, it's that she masters it. And she walks away. And the third time she comes back, this time she realizes, wait, this will make me wise. And for wisdom's sake, she eats it. Not for hunger, not for possession, nothing to do with having, but only in the context of being, in this case, being wise, does she eat it. The serpent speaks to the woman because the serpent knows only the woman has the capacity to master these desires. Which the Bible proves in the next clause, right? The woman perceived the tree was good for eating, doesn't eat it. She was a delight to the eyes, she doesn't eat it. The tree was desirable as a means for wisdom, and she took of its fruit and she ate. The rest of the verse 6, and she gave also, now my book says her husband. There's no marriage here. They're not married. It's just that the translator was embarrassed by two people just hanging out together, even if they're the only two people on the planet. So the actual Hebrew is ish, man. So it says, and she gave also to the man who was with her, and he ate it. He didn't say, hey, wait, God said we could die. He didn't think of that. He didn't say, I must master my first level desires for consuming. No, thank you, dear, but no, He doesn't go through anything. He just takes it and eats it. Now, he was right there with her, so we don't know that earlier in the verse. It sounds like she's walking by herself, and she masters, these levels of desire. But the third time, when she's ready to realize, or at least have some intimation of what it would be to become wise, the guy is right there. The woman's mistake is to think that the man is her psychological equal. Now, you remember I mentioned last time, and he just died this week, Harold Bloom. I don't know if you saw it in the paper, but Yale professor of English literature, Harold Bloom, I think it was this week, he died. And he does Bible commentary. And in his book called The Book of J, he talks about these early Genesis stories. And he makes the case, and it's pretty convincing, I think, that a lot of these Genesis stories were written by women in David's court. These were the literary, the Anne Pratchetts of their time, right? And they wrote these. This is a very beautiful story. Well crafted, right? This is not just something that somebody threw together on Twitter. This is a well crafted story. And Bloom's argument is that these were written by women for their fellow intellectual women. Of course, fellow women, that makes no sense. But for the women in the court who were their intellectual equals, and written often to make fun of their men. And that's clearly part of what's going on here. There's a deeper, I think, philosophical issue. But clearly, the story could be read on one level as just, men are stupid, right? They have no self-control. Here's this woman, she masters her hunger, she masters her desire to possess, she masters having, she's going to risk everything. She still thinks she could die. She risks everything for wisdom and says, here, darling, now it's your turn. And she hands a donut to Homer Simpson. And he just eats it. Oh, great. Oh, this is really great. So if Bloom is right, this could just be, an episode of The Simpsons where the writers are making fun of men. I mean, that in and of itself would be of interest. But from the rabbinical point of view, since they're all men, they're not really willing to go there. It's not simply that. It's a major commentary on the nature of the two sexes. Men are fundamentally mindless creatures of consumption. Women are fundamentally thoughtful, I don't want to give away where it's going here, thoughtful apostles of wisdom, because there's going to be more to this. They're very, very different. The man is a holy fire, but he has no direction. He doesn't know what to do with this holy fire. The woman has internalized, and I used the word digested earlier, she's digested the holiness of the yud, the Y letter, that gives you this E sound for ish or isha. She's digested it just like she digests the apple. And having completely assimilated this divine energy, she knows what to do with it, which is why she has the H at the end of her name, or the Hey at the end of the word Isha, woman, because she knows where it's supposed to take us. Adam just eats and doesn't get what she gets, as we'll see in a second. But I'm going to stop for a second because I want to make sure you're with me. Anybody lost? No? Anybody need a divorce? No? Okay. So we're going to skip a bunch of things because you know these. I'm just bringing out the points that are misunderstood. You probably never heard what I've just told you. So they heard the sound of God manifesting himself in the garden, and you'll have different translations. And the man and the woman hid from God among the trees of the garden. God called out to the man and said to him. This is true in Hebrew, masculine singular. This is true in the English, masculine singular. The woman is the one who violated the commandment, don't eat from the tree, and yet God ignores her and talks to the man. So that's another remez. It makes no sense. Literal reading says, no, the woman is the one who committed the crime here. The guy isn't even part of the conspiracy. He's just collateral damage. Why doesn't God speak to the woman? Now, one answer is because it's a sexist text, right? But that's too easy. That's too easy. Then you might as well not read this book. But if there's something to this book and to these stories, that we won't take that cheap shot. I'm not saying it isn't a sexist book. I'm just saying that distracts us. The reason that God speaks to the man, as we will see in detail, is that the man is now a problem for God and the woman is not. If the snake was in fact the Messiah, if the snake was doing the messianic work of lifting up the human, sort of not physical evolution, but spiritual evolution, and did it through because he only had two choices, the serpent, the woman or the man, and chose the only one that had a possibility of actually getting the point, then the woman is not the problem. The man is the problem. What is the man's problem? The man says, or God says, God called out to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" He, the man, said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And God said, "Who told you you were naked? Who invented that idea?" Or if you want to not go in that direction, God goes, "I know you're naked. I wrote that in the book." In the other chapter. You're naked and unashamed. There's nothing wrong with being naked. All of a sudden, you're naked. Why does eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of opposites, good and evil, why does that express itself in the man as being naked? The woman says nothing about it. Why is the guy, the first thing he goes to is, I'm naked. I mean, God could have said, of course you're naked. I hadn't invented clothing. I'm waiting for the Brooks Brothers. But he doesn't do that. He goes, I'm naked. Not only am I naked, the guy says, I was afraid because I was naked. Now, I can understand being naked and ashamed. I see myself every morning. Oh, man, you know, this diet, I've been on this diet for 30 years, and so I could get the fact, oh, I was ashamed. I ate the fruit, and it was way more calories, you know, and you could say, I can't believe I ate the whole thing. Remember that commercial? But he doesn't, I was afraid. What causes fear? Something the woman doesn't have. What causes fear? Now, yeah.
But he says, then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves.
What verse are you on?
7.
Right, so right. So, but they weren't afraid. I mean, they saw that they were naked, and they sewed clothes for themselves. But that doesn't cause fear, right? I don't know. I mean, why would you think? The question is, why would they sew clothes for themselves? Yeah, well, it could be. So she said that maybe because they're not supposed to show their loins. I always misread it as lions. I was like, lions? But they're not supposed to show their loins. But even if that's true, they made that up, right? God never tells them that. Something is going on with them. But what I think is the more important thing is that God stops talking to the woman, only talks to the man, only talks to man for the rest of the story. Yeah, you want to? So, well, the word, she said she needs the definition of naked. So the word is arum, and it could mean pure, what did you say, intellect? Yeah, it could mean intellect. Then we also said cunning, devious, more negative things. But it's not simply unclothed. Yeah.
So a room in the faith is purity.
Yeah.
Is a room also used when God is dressing out?
Yeah, I mean, the word is the word. So God says, who told you you were naked? In the next verse, right? Yeah, who told you you were pure? So now we're getting to the point. They ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the opposites. And all of a sudden they fall into the world, or at least he does, the world of opposites. Now he says, I was naked or I was pure and I was afraid. And God says, who told you about purity? Because the only way you know about purity is because you know about impurity. They go together. I didn't create you with that dichotomy. That comes from eating from the tree. The dichotomy is not the problem, because if you don't know the difference, now we're talking morality for a second, if you don't know the difference between good and evil, you're in trouble, right? And we call that a sociopath or a psychopath. But it's not just moral opposites. I mean, you have to know the difference between right and left. It's very difficult when you don't. I mean, I forget what the disease is, but it runs in my family. My sister has it, I have it. I have to stop and think which is right and which is left. I actually wear socks, and this is the way they come from the producer, but my socks have an R and an L on them. But I often have to stop and think which foot is the R foot and which foot is the L foot. Because there's something missing. I can't read maps. I have some problem. So, all of these opposites go together. Up and down, in and out. I mean, they all go together. Ultimately, everything in the universe, from the wisdom consciousness, is interconnected. The problem Adam is, or the man is having, is that the link, rather than see good and evil, or purity, impurity in one thing, or what Martin Buber calls I and thou, that you and I are together in one larger unit. Rather than see that, he sees, and we'll get more explicit in a second, he sees them separated, and now they're opposed to one another as rather than being complementary, complements of one another, and now he's trapped in this duality. Okay, so now let me see where this takes us. So the man then blames the woman, and then God says to the woman, "What did you do?" And she says, "The serpent, deceived me." So then they have this whole thing. Well, in that case, the woman is going to suffer a pain in childbirth, and the guy is going to have to farm, and he's going to earn his living by the sweat of his brow, and the serpent's going to have to slither on its belly, because before it was walking around on legs. This is where, and I mentioned the term earlier, teleological. These are called teleological verses. They may or may not have been in the original story. I mean, that's all speculation. But the idea of teleology is that these stories explain stuff that we know to be true. Women have pain in childbirth. How come? Well, they didn't have a lot of science to work with. So they came up with this story. Oh, it's punishment. How come it's so hard to grow stuff? I mean, the garden was just fecund all by itself. How come we have to work so hard to get food out of the ground? Oh, it's punishment. How come there are lizards with legs and lizards without legs? Oh, it's punishment. They all had legs once, but the snake was punished. So that's teleology. I don't make much out of that. The commentaries don't seem to do much with that. They just go, that's just the way that is. And they focus more on the rest of the story. So, in verse 20, the woman gets a name for no reason. Now we know that Adam, the first thing Adam does before Adam does anything else in the Bible is he names things. Right? God says it's not good for Adam to be alone, so God brings all the animals to Adam, and Adam says this is a cow, and this is a horse, and this is, right? The rabbinic commentary says he had sex with all the animals. And that's how, because it says he knew them, but he knew them biblically. He had sex with all the animals. And that's when he finished, God says, well, he's still alone. So none of these are a good match for him. Because what does God know? God just made these creatures, and he said, let's pair them up. There was a Ken, there was no Barbie, so he said, let's try a gorilla, right? Adam, who doesn't change much in our story, just okay. But he is the namer. I don't know if you know or remember that Bob Dylan song, Man Gave Names to All the Animals. It's this brilliant Dylan song. It's also a little kid's book, but it doesn't talk about sex. It just is a rhyming song to guess what the names of the animals are. My 3-year-old grandson loves it because he can guess, the animals. So Adam is the name giver. He looks at his partner, and in verse 20, and it says, the man called the woman's name Eve, Chava. Chava in the Hebrew. Maybe CHVA, just to get the sound right. He calls her Chava. And then he defines what Chava means. And he says, the man called the woman's name Chava, Eve, because she had become the mother of all the living. That's a huge remez, a huge hint that something is in the story that is not obvious. She hasn't given birth to anything. What does it mean for her to be the mother of all the living? So it's a title, really. Right? He sees her as, you could write it with capitals. Bible doesn't have lowercase and uppercase, but you could read it as, I'm going to call you Chava because you are the mother with a capital M of all the living. Or maybe capital M, mother, and capital A, all, and capital L, living. That's her title, Mother of all the living. Now, last week, we learned who the mother of all the living is, or in the story. Right? The mother of all the living is another woman called Chochmah, or in the Greek Bible, Sophia, or in the English, wisdom, or in the wisdom literature, Lady Wisdom sometimes, because wisdom is a woman. Wisdom, wisdom is the mother of all creation. That's what we learned in Proverbs chapter 8, starting in verse 22. God creates wisdom, wisdom creates the world. Or in Genesis 1:1, it says in most Bibles, if you weren't here last week, in the beginning, but the Hebrew actually says by means of beginning, and the word is for beginning is Reshit. And then in Proverbs, we learned that Reshit is one of the titles of wisdom. Wisdom is the beginning. So the commentary says, or a commentary says, by means of Lady Wisdom, the world was created. The man looks at this woman who has brought wisdom into the world and says, and identifies her with her. So identifies Chava, Eve, with Chochmah, wisdom. He sees her as the embodiment of Lady Wisdom and gives her this title. This is all commentary. And it's coming from the remez. Why does he call her anything? Why, or if he's going to call her Eve or Chava is maybe from life, Chai. Why go into this extra piece? And the commentary says, the drash says, because she is now identified as wisdom. So remember back in the beginning, an hour ago, Ish, Isha. Ish, the man with the letter of God still visible. Isha, with the first letter of God completely internalized, giving her direction. That's the H at the end. She's got both the internalized Y, the expressed H. Together that means Yah, that's God's name, one of God's names. She is now a divine awake being, and he sees it. He doesn't know exactly what to do with it, but he sees it. And therefore, he calls her the mother of all the living. He sees her as an incarnation of Chochmah, wisdom. Then God makes them more clothes. I guess the clothes they made before really weren't that good. And then God says to whomever, right? We don't know who God's talking to. But God says, behold, the man has become like the unique one among us, knowing good and bad. Now, lest he put forth his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever, we got to kick him out. Who God's talking to is up for speculation. It's like when God says, let us create. Bible doesn't say. Could be the royal we, like when the queen speaks, she speaks in the royal we. It could be the God is talking to the animals because they're around. Or it could be, as the wisdom commentary suggests, that God is talking to Chachma. And God says, this guy is now, and your Bible probably says, like one of us. So you'll hear the difference. If that's what the Hebrew said, it would say, the guy is ke'echad, echad mimenu. He's one of us. Echad is one. But it doesn't. It says achad mimenu, meaning one separate from us. So my English tries to get up at that by using the word unique. That the guy has gotten just enough consciousness raising to see himself as other than everything else and other than God. This is where the dualism of God and humanity starts, with this guy incapable of seeing that, this guy who now sees himself apart from God, rather than what the woman knows is that she and everything else are a part of God. So God is concerned about this guy, and so it's singular, masculine. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat that and live forever, the grammar is all wrong here, but God banishes him, masculine singular, from the Garden of Eden to work the soil from which he, masculine singular, was taken. And only Adam comes from Adamah. The woman comes from Adam's side. So not rib, by the way. It doesn't say rib in the Hebrew. It says side. The rabbi said that they were conjoined twins, and that they were joined at the back. It was the back side. And so wherever they looked and saw only themselves, because the other person, So if you have a partner who's always on your back, it's like very biblical. So God puts the Adam to sleep and then splits them into Ish and Isha. So it's not rib. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. So the problem is that the man might now go and eat from the tree of life. What's the problem there? We haven't heard about the tree of life. God never said don't eat from the tree of life. Why now is he concerned? And the commentator says, this is the remez. It suddenly introduces tree of life. The drash is, the guy doesn't get the fruit. He didn't digest it. The Adam's apple thing that men have. He didn't digest it. He got just enough wisdom to feel alienated from God. If he now eats from the tree of life, he will be stuck in that psycho-spiritual state for all eternity. That we can't have. So it says in verse 23, so God banishes him from the Garden of Eden to work the soil from which he came. The woman is just left behind in the garden. It's no big deal. She's got it. She's woke, if you like. She knows she's a part of and not apart from the divine. So he is not worried about her. So God banishes the man. Having driven out the man, he stationed at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and the flame of the ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. Now, we normally think of it as to keep the man from coming back to the tree of life. But the commentators, or some, right, say, no, it says guard, it says protect, to protect the way to the tree of life. So if and when the man ever finally digests the wisdom that he tasted, then he can come back to the garden. And just to make sure he knows how to get there, there's a giant neon sign going, this way to the tree of life, right? So that you can find your way back. So where's Eve? In the next chapter, they're having sex. So clearly, it's not a long-distance relationship. She is no longer in the garden. She leaves. But she's not banished. Only the guy is banished. The only reason we know she's not still in the garden is because she's having sex and children outside the garden. Why does she leave? If, and I'm just going to wrap this up so we can have a little time for questions. If she is the mother of all the living, if she is now identified with wisdom, wisdom told us in the book of Proverbs, chapter 9, that she has these women disciples, and she sends them out into the world of men to bring men to her. Now, in the Proverbs, it's already humans, but so it's not that all men are losers and all women are winners. It's by the time you get to you and I, we're all losers. But there are some women who are still the mothers of all the living who reach out and try to bring us to Lady Wisdom. That's the role that Eve plays when she's leaving the garden. And the last thing that's interesting, and you can look for it, we don't have to find the chapter and verse, this goes on, their relationship lasts for 930 years. Wow. They had a really strong prenup, and nobody wanted to, deal with it. So they were they were together for 930 years. Then Adam dies, the man dies. Eve never dies in the Bible. Now, some characters in the Bible, like Enoch, Enoch doesn't die either, but we know in the Bible, we're told, he's lifted up into heaven and he becomes one layer down from the divine. His consciousness is that expanded. We don't know anything like that about Eve. All we know is she never dies. In the Wisdom commentary, she spends eternity wandering around trying to bring humans back to wisdom. That's her task. And her disciples are other women who have internalized the first letter of God's name. They've internalized wisdom, and they now have this direction, and the direction is back to the garden. Like Joni Mitchell sang, in Woodstock. You're going to go back to Yasgur's farm where there's the tree of life. So this is a radically different read of a very old and well-known, supposedly in quotes, story that turns on its head the entire misogyny that the story is used to promote. And this interpretation that I'm giving you is thousands of years old. It just doesn't serve men well, which is why most of us haven't heard of it. So I'm going to stop there. I'd love to tell you to take this to your church and your synagogue and your ministers and your priests and your rabbis and say, look what this really means, but I don't want you to get banished from the garden. Questions? We've got like 10, well, we don't even have 10 minutes. Yeah.
You asked a question, what causes fear, and you got distracted by a question in the audience. Would you address that?
Yeah, so Vicky says, we raised the issue, what causes fear? So what causes fear is the sense of separation that Adam experiences. Now he's all alone. Now he's all by himself. None of us are really alone or by ourselves. I mean, Jesus says, wherever 2 or 3 gather in my name, there, I will be with them. Earlier in the Jewish tradition, it says, even when one person is contemplating the divine, the Shekhinah, the feminine presence of God is with you. You cannot be alone because everything in the universe is interconnected. And that's what wisdom shows you. But the guy didn't get that piece of wisdom and therefore is afraid because he seems cut off. She doesn't say anything. We just know it's just like when she left the garden. He left, she left to take care of him. He hid, well, I better go see where he is. But the only one who says, I was afraid, is the guy. I mean, none of these things are perfect. That's why there's, a million plus legitimate commentaries on the Bible. If you find holes in what I'm saying, those are just more hints to go in some other direction. So, yeah.
What is true now is true tens of thousands of years ago, which is that women were men, and therefore women have, I think it's a real love-hate relationship between sons and mothers, because the mother is all-powerful, and then the man has to be born and grew up on his own. And, I think there's a real sense of separation there, but also yearning and
She's saying, Dr. Freud is saying that because men, not mankind, but because men come from mothers, and we have to deal with this separation from our mother, and all the psychological issues that go with that, and we have this yearning for mother, and the Bible says you're yearning for a part of an opposite sex partner, talking to a man, talking about a woman, but we could go beyond the heterosexual trope here. But the Bible says you're yearning, guys, you're yearning for a female partner will be so great that you'll leave your mother. Not everyone does that. I swear to God, now don't tell anybody this. I have a friend who married his mother. Not literally, but when I met his wife, she looked exactly like his mother looked when she was the age of his wife. It's like, don't you see that you married your mother? I didn't say that, but I thought, wow, I wish I was a therapist. I'd make a lot of money on this guy. Yeah. If you look at the Kabbalah, the question is, if you look at the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is a totally different system in Judaism than what we're talking about, the Jewish mystics wanted masculine and feminine unity on their tree of life. And so they took half the tree and said this was masculine, and the other side was feminine. The problem is that both sides the words are all feminine. So they had to simply not think about that. And so in the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, wisdom is considered masculine, but that's just I would say it's a patriarchal thing, but that's just not, the tradition we're talking about predates that by like 1,500 years or something, and they don't do that there. So hang on one second, anyone who hasn't said anything, and they're giving me the high sign, so last word. Okay, so tell the other group they're not coming in. So the question is, where does Lilith come in? If you know the character Lilith, very quickly. Genesis 1, God creates the human, male and female. Then later on, God creates the human, but there's no woman mentioned. So the rabbis have this tradition, because that's another hint, so what do they come up with? They come up with the idea that there were two women. In the first story, God creates this guy and a woman named Lilith. But Lilith and Adam do not get along. According to the rabbis, they disagreed on sexual postures, positions. That Adam wanted to be on top, Lilith wanted to be on top. They went to God to say, who's on top? God said, the man is on top. And Lilith said, I'm out of here. And she leaves the garden. And then it says, it's not good that man be alone, let's make woman. But it doesn't really help, because she's got her own problems, her own issues. So thank you. We have to exit quickly.